It was just after midnight in a quiet Ottawa suburb. Streetlights glowed faintly along the sidewalks, and the sound of passing cars had long faded into silence. An 18-year-old girl finished her late shift at work and began the familiar walk home. It was a path she had taken many times before, well-lit, predictable, and usually safe. But on this night, something went terribly wrong. She never made it home. What began as a standard missing persons report quickly spiraled into one of the most chilling murder cases in Canadian history. A young woman vanished into the night, and an entire city was shaken by fear, grief, and unanswered questions. For weeks, her family searched relentlessly. The community rallied behind them, and investigators chased down every lead. Suspects came and went, rumors spread like wildfire, and the pressure on law enforcement mounted with each passing day. And then, just when it seemed the trail had gone cold, a series of shocking twists unraveled the mystery in ways no one could have predicted. A killer hiding in plain sight, a confession that seemed too strange to be true, and a trial that exposed the darkest corners of the human mind. This is the heartbreaking story of Jennifer Teague. Jennifer Teague was born on June 30th, 1987, in Ottawa, Canada's capital city. She was the youngest of 3 children in a close-knit family. Her 2 older brothers often teased her, as siblings do, but they were also fiercely protective. To them, Jennifer wasn't just a little sister. She was the heart of the family, the one who always carried a smile that could brighten even the toughest days. When Jennifer's parents divorced, life shifted, as it often does for children in that situation. Jennifer and her mother moved into her grandmother's home, while her father remained nearby and stayed actively involved in her life. Unlike some broken families where distance grows, Jennifer's parents worked hard to remain present, ensuring she always felt surrounded by love and support. It gave her stability even during times of change. Growing up, Jennifer was full of energy. She loved sports and wasn't afraid to get competitive. Baseball, soccer, and especially hockey, she played them all. Her bedroom walls were covered in posters of her favorite hockey players, a sign of her passion for the game. Friends would later recall that she wasn't the type to sit still for long. She loved being active, moving, and being part of a team. But Jennifer wasn't only about sports. She also had a heart for bigger causes. In her teenage years, she joined an environmental group that visited elementary schools, teaching kids about the importance of caring for nature. For someone so young, her sense of responsibility stood out. She cared deeply, not just about her own future, but about the world she lived in. As she entered high school, Jennifer started thinking about her own path. She didn't have it all figured out. Like most teenagers, she was exploring possibilities. Some days she thought about fashion design, fascinated by creativity and style. Other times, she leaned toward environmental studies, driven by her passion for protecting the planet. What was clear, however, was that Jennifer was a dreamer with ambition. She wanted to do something meaningful, even if she hadn't yet chosen exactly what that would be. Alongside her studies, Jennifer worked part-time jobs to cover her expenses and put money aside. She was independent, the kind of teenager who didn't expect everything to be handed to her. At the time of her disappearance, she was working evening shifts at a local Wendy's. Around this period, she also adopted a kitten from a shelter, showing her compassionate side once again. She had plans to use her next paycheck to cover the kitten's shots, a small but telling example of her responsible and caring nature. To her friends, Jennifer was fun-loving, reliable, and someone you could count on. To her family, she was thoughtful and kind, with a playful side that made her home brighter. She was just like so many 18-year-olds, balancing school, work, and friendships while slowly stepping into adulthood. Ottawa in 2005 was not considered a dangerous city. It was a community where people felt safe walking home late at night, where neighbors knew one another, and where crime rarely made national headlines. For Jennifer and her peers, the city's quiet neighborhoods felt secure. That sense of safety would make her disappearance all the more shocking, because what happened next shattered the community's sense of trust forever. September 7th, 2005, began like any other Wednesday for Jennifer Teague. She went to school, chatted with friends, and came home for a quick break before heading out to her evening shift at Wendy's. It was the start of her senior year, and she was balancing the pressure of classes with the responsibility of working. But to Jennifer, it was routine. Nothing about that day suggested the storm that was about to unfold. Her shift at Wendy's went as expected. She worked through the evening, helping customers, cleaning up, and finishing her duties alongside her coworkers. By the time midnight rolled around, the restaurant was closing, and Jennifer prepared for her usual walk home. For most people, the idea of walking late at night might bring fear, but for Jennifer, this was familiar. She had walked that route many times. Ottawa was considered safe, and the streets she used were well lit. It was just over a mile to her house, a short walk she had done countless times before. But this night was slightly different. The buses had already stopped running, which meant she had no choice but to walk the entire way. Still, she wasn't entirely alone. On her way out, she called two friends who were finishing their own shifts at nearby restaurants. They decided to meet up at a 24-hour convenience store located halfway between her job and her house. It was a familiar routine, just teenagers extending the night, catching up on stories before heading home. The three of them sat outside the store, chatting under the glow of the fluorescent lights. They laughed, traded stories about their shifts, and passed the time until about 1:30 in the morning. For Jennifer, it was a chance to relax after a long day, but eventually it was time to go. Her friends lived in a different direction, so they parted ways. Jennifer started walking toward home, a journey that should have taken her no more than 18 minutes. What makes this moment chilling is how ordinary it all was. Jennifer wasn't in a risky situation. She wasn't in a secluded area. She was walking on streets she knew, streets she had always trusted. Yet somewhere along that short walk, everything went wrong. The next day, her absence began to unravel into worry. Jennifer's mother noticed something unusual. She hadn't seen her daughter since the night before. First, it didn't seem alarming. Jennifer's room was in the basement, and it wasn't uncommon for her to slip in quietly after work without waking anyone. In the mornings, she usually left early to catch the school bus before the rest of the family was awake. But that day, Jennifer never came home. By the evening of September 8th, panic began to set in. Jennifer hadn't shown up for school, hadn't answered her mom's calls, and even missed her shift at Wendy's. Something completely out of character. She was responsible, dependable, and always let someone know where she was. Her mother began calling friends, but no one had seen her since the night before. When Jennifer's dad confirmed he hadn't heard from her either, the family realized something was terribly wrong. That night, Jennifer's parents went straight to the police to report her missing. Even though she was legally an adult at 18, officers did not delay. They recognized immediately that this wasn't the case of a runaway teenager. Something serious had happened. Within hours, search efforts were underway. Officers began retracing Jennifer's last known movements, starting from the Wendy's and leading toward the convenience store where she had met her friends. Flyers were printed with her photo, volunteers joined the effort, and neighbors canvassed the streets. At first, everyone hoped they might find Jennifer safe, perhaps injured, lost, or stuck somewhere. But as the hours passed with no trace, the fear grew heavier. The short walk Jennifer had made so many times before had turned into a haunting mystery. Somewhere between 1:30 in the morning and her expected arrival at home, Jennifer Teague had vanished, and no one knew why. The first 48 hours in any missing persons case are critical, and in Jennifer Teague's case, investigators knew the clock was already ticking. The Ottawa Police Service quickly mobilized a large-scale search. Officers retraced Jennifer's last known steps, starting from the Wendy's where she clocked out after midnight, to the convenience store where she met her friends, and along the familiar route that should have brought her home. Volunteers joined the effort almost immediately. Neighbors, friends, and complete strangers showed up to help, distributing flyers with Jennifer's photo, searching wooded paths, and knocking on doors. Within a day, her face was everywhere in Barrhaven. Local media covered the case intensely, broadcasting her picture across television screens, and newspapers printed her story on the front page. Jennifer was described as dependable, bright, and deeply loved. This wasn't a teenager running away, it was something far more sinister. Police also began house-to-house interviews. They asked if anyone had seen or heard anything unusual that night. Strange vehicles, suspicious individuals, or sounds that might point to a struggle. But most residents reported nothing. It was as though Jennifer had vanished into thin air. Investigators also looked at Jennifer's routine. She was a responsible student with a steady job and close friends. There were no signs of secret troubles, no involvement with drugs, no risky relationships, nothing to suggest she would disappear voluntarily. That absence of motive only heightened the urgency. Something or someone had taken her off that street. Police then expanded their efforts with canine units and specialized search teams. Dogs were brought in to track Jennifer's scent along the route she would have walked. They picked up her trail briefly but eventually lost it in an area near wooded land off Jockvale Road. It was a chilling discovery, suggesting she may have been forced off the main road. As the days passed, the community's anxiety deepened. Parents no longer felt safe letting their children walk alone, even in broad daylight. The Barrhaven suburb, once seen as a quiet and family-friendly area, was suddenly cast under the shadow of fear. Jennifer's family remained at the forefront of the search. Her mother spoke tearfully to the media, pleading for her daughter's safe return. Her father worked alongside search teams, refusing to give up hope. Each day brought more volunteers, but no concrete leads. Investigators considered every possibility. They looked into Jennifer's co-workers and friends, checking for inconsistencies in their stories. They questioned residents with criminal records in the area. They even monitored sexual offenders living nearby. But one by one, those avenues led nowhere. Then came a breakthrough, but not the kind anyone had hoped for. On September 17, 2005, 10 days after Jennifer went missing, searchers made a heartbreaking discovery in a wooded area near Cedarview Road. Hidden from plain sight, they found Jennifer's body. The investigation was no longer a missing persons case. It was now a homicide. The news devastated the community. Candlelight vigils were held across Barrhaven, where friends, neighbors, and even strangers gathered to grieve. The Teague family, though shattered, stood strong in their resolve to find the person responsible. Police assured the public that they were pursuing every lead, but behind the scenes, frustration mounted. They had a victim, a community in fear, but no suspect to point to. For weeks, investigators worked tirelessly, gathering forensic evidence, conducting interviews, and analyzing Jennifer's final movements. Yet nothing seemed to break open the case. No fingerprints, no eyewitnesses, no clear trail pointing to a killer. It was as though Jennifer's murder had been carried out by someone who knew exactly how to avoid detection. But then, a name began to surface. Someone in the neighborhood had drawn attention to themselves, not through evidence, but through behavior. A man who lived not far from where Jennifer was last seen. He had a history of erratic actions and troubling patterns. Though police couldn't yet prove it, suspicions were beginning to form. And eventually, this man would become the center of one of the most unsettling murder confessions in Canadian history. Weeks after Jennifer's body was found, the investigation struggled to gain traction. The police were under immense pressure, from the community, the media, and Jennifer's grieving family, to deliver answers. But the crime scene offered few clues, and no clear suspects emerged. The investigation was stalling. Then, almost out of nowhere, a breakthrough came, not through police work, but from the suspect himself. His name was Kevin Davis. He was 24 years old, lived not far from Jennifer's neighborhood, and had no serious criminal record. By all appearances, he was just another young man in the suburb. But beneath the surface, Davis harbored disturbing thoughts that had gone unnoticed. In November 2005, 2 months after Jennifer's murder, Davis walked into a police station on his own accord. To the astonishment of officers, he calmly confessed that he had killed Jennifer Teague. It wasn't under interrogation. It wasn't prompted by new evidence. He He simply sat down and told them what he had done. Investigators were stunned. Murder suspects almost never confess voluntarily, especially without a lawyer present. And yet here was Kevin Davis, speaking in a flat, almost detached manner about how he had taken Jennifer's life. But what made the confession even more chilling were the details he provided. Davis said that on the night of September 8, 2005, he was walking near Jockvale Road when he saw Jennifer making her way home. Overcome by an impulse he described as irrational and compulsive, he decided to follow her. He grabbed her, forced her off the path, and dragged her into a wooded area. He then suffocated her. What stood out most to investigators was his lack of emotion. He didn't cry. He didn't appear angry. He didn't even attempt to justify his actions. He described the events almost as if he were recounting a routine task. Police officers later said it was one of the most unsettling confessions they had ever witnessed. Davis explained that he had been struggling with violent thoughts for some time. He claimed he wasn't targeting Jennifer specifically. She just happened to cross his path that night. His words painted a portrait not of a man seeking revenge or acting out of passion, but of someone consumed by dark urges he felt powerless to control. For investigators, the confession seemed almost too neat, too sudden. But Davis backed it up with details only the killer would know. He described the wooded area, the method he used, and even the position in which Jennifer had fallen. All of it matched what police had found at the crime scene. There was little doubt Kevin Davis was telling the truth. The arrest sent shockwaves through the community. Many struggled to understand how someone like Davis, quiet, relatively unknown, and without a serious criminal history, could commit such a senseless act. Neighbors described him as a loner. Some said he kept to himself, while others noted his odd behavior, but nothing that suggested he was capable of murder. During later interviews, Davis revealed something even more disturbing. He claimed that after the murder, he didn't feel guilt in the way most would expect. Instead, he said he felt a sense of relief, like a burden had been lifted. He told investigators that he had long battled violent fantasies, and by killing Jennifer, he had released them. These words chilled not just law enforcement but also the public. It painted Davis not as a man who acted out of anger, jealousy, or even opportunity, but as someone living with deep psychological demons. His confession became a window into the mind of a killer who might have struck again had he not turned himself in. The community, still grieving Jennifer's loss, now faced a haunting question. Why did Davis come forward? Why, after committing a murder, would he voluntarily confess? Some speculated that his conscience had finally caught up with him. Others believed he craved recognition for what he had done. Psychologists suggested it may have been a mixture of guilt, compulsion, and a twisted need to unburden himself. Whatever his reason, his confession closed the mystery of who killed Jennifer Teague, but it opened an entirely new chapter, the trial. And in court, Kevin Davis's disturbing mindset would be laid bare for all to see. When Kevin Davis confessed to the murder of Jennifer Teague, it shocked not only investigators but also the entire nation. But in Canada's justice system, even a confession doesn't close a case. It had to go to trial, where prosecutors would lay out their evidence, and Davis's words would be tested under the scrutiny of the law. In 2007, nearly 2 years after Jennifer's death, Kevin Davis stood trial for second-degree murder. From the very beginning, the proceedings were unusual. Unlike many accused killers who fight to prove their innocence, Davis made no attempt to deny what he had done. He had already confessed, and he did not retract it. Instead, the trial became less about whether he killed Jennifer and more about why. The courtroom was filled with Jennifer's family and friends, each day bringing painful reminders of the loss they had suffered. Her parents, broken but determined, listened as prosecutors pieced together the tragic final hours of their daughter's life. Jurors were shown the path Jennifer had taken home, the wooded area where she was attacked, and the forensic evidence that supported Davis's confession. But the most disturbing part of the trial came from Davis's own words. Investigators presented journals and writings that revealed a window into his troubled mind. In them, Davis described violent urges, dark fantasies, and a growing obsession with the idea of killing. He admitted that he had contemplated murder before Jennifer, but had never acted on it until that September night. Psychologists called to testify explained that Davis seemed to suffer from deep psychological disturbances. They spoke of compulsions, obsessive thoughts, and a lack of empathy that made him dangerous. Yet Davis wasn't deemed legally insane. He knew what he was doing was wrong. He simply chose to act on his impulses. In court, Davis's demeanor was as unsettling as his confession. He showed little emotion, often speaking in a calm, almost flat voice. At times, he appeared detached, as though he were an observer rather than the man responsible for the crime. For Jennifer's family, this lack of remorse was almost unbearable. It reinforced the cruel reality that their daughter's life had been taken not by accident or rage, but by a man driven by dark, selfish compulsions. Prosecutors argued that Davis had deliberately stalked Jennifer and carried out the murder with intent. They painted him as a predator who had been waiting for an opportunity. The defense, on the other hand, leaned into Davis's psychological state. They suggested that his confession itself was proof of a man racked by guilt and inner conflict, not someone coldly calculating his escape. But the jury was unmoved. After hearing all the evidence, they found Kevin Davis guilty of second-degree murder. In Canada, this conviction carries an automatic life sentence with no eligibility for parole for at least 10 years. The judge, however, set Davis's parole ineligibility at 25 years, the maximum allowed. It was a strong message that his crime was among the most serious imaginable. When the verdict was read, Jennifer's family wept quietly in the courtroom. For them, there was no sense of victory, only the grim relief that justice had been served in some measure. They would never see their daughter again. No sentence, no matter how long, could change that. But knowing that Davis would spend decades behind bars gave them at least a small measure of peace. After the trial, details continued to emerge about Davis's inner world. He admitted to police that he had been consumed by dark thoughts for years, and even suggested that if he hadn't killed Jennifer, he would have eventually harmed someone else. Those words left a chilling thought lingering in the air. Had Davis not confessed, would he have killed again? For the Barrhaven community, the trial's conclusion marked the end of one chapter, but the wounds remained. Jennifer's murder had left scars on a neighborhood that once felt safe and secure. Parents now watched their children more closely. Young women hesitated before walking alone at night. The sense of innocence that had defined the suburb was gone forever. When the trial ended and Kevin Davis was led away to begin his life sentence, Ottawa breathed a collective sigh of relief. But for Jennifer Teague's family and the Barrhaven community, relief did not mean healing. The loss was permanent, the wounds were deep, and the story of Jennifer's short life and tragic death would echo for years to come. Jennifer's parents described her as a bright, kind-hearted young woman with her whole future ahead of her. She worked part-time at a fast food restaurant, loved music, and enjoyed spending time with friends. She had a warm smile that drew people in and a resilience that helped her through life's challenges. In many ways, Jennifer was like countless other 18-year-olds across the country, making plans, dreaming big, and discovering who she was meant to be. That ordinariness made her story even more heartbreaking. She could have been anyone's daughter, sister, or friend. In the wake of her death, the Teague family faced unimaginable grief. But they also made a decision. Jennifer's story would not be defined only by tragedy. Her father, Ed Teague, began speaking publicly about her life and the lessons her case revealed. He wrote a book titled Bring Jennifer Home, a deeply personal reflection on his daughter's life, her disappearance, and the investigation that followed. In it, he chronicled not only the details of the case, but also the emotional journey of a family forced to endure the unthinkable. The book and his public appearances became a way to both honor Jennifer's memory and to raise awareness about violence, safety, and community responsibility. Ed spoke about the importance of not turning a blind eye to suspicious behavior, of reaching out when someone seems troubled, and of remembering that crimes like Jennifer's don't just affect victims. They ripple through entire communities. The impact of Jennifer's case was felt most acutely in Barrhaven. Before 2005, the suburb was seen as a safe, quiet place. an ideal environment for families. Jennifer's murder shattered that image. Suddenly, residents looked at their streets differently. Parents who once allowed their teenagers to walk home late at night now thought twice. Neighborhood watch groups strengthened. People became more cautious, more vigilant. The innocence of Barrhaven had been forever altered. Yet, in the midst of that darkness, there were signs of resilience. Vigils were held every year on the anniversary of Jennifer's disappearance. Friends and strangers gathered to light candles, share memories, and promise that she would not be forgotten. These vigils became not just a time of mourning, but also of solidarity. They reminded everyone that while evil exists, so too does compassion, unity, and the determination to fight back against violence. Jennifer's story also sparked broader conversations across Canada about how communities respond to crime. It raised questions about how to recognize the warning signs of dangerous behavior, how to support those struggling with dark thoughts, and how law enforcement and neighborhoods can work together more effectively. In some ways, Jennifer's legacy became a call to action, a reminder that safety isn't just about locks and lights, but about caring for one another and staying aware. For her family, though, the most important legacy was simply to keep her memory alive. Jennifer was not just a victim in a headline. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a young woman whose life mattered. And by sharing her story, they ensured that she would continue to inspire empathy, awareness, and change. Even now, nearly 2 decades later, Jennifer Teague's name carries weight in Ottawa. It represents not only a tragedy, but also the resilience of a community and the strength of a family who refused to let her memory fade. She may be gone, but her story endures, and in that story, she still speaks. When we look back on Jennifer Teague's story, it's impossible not to feel the weight of what was lost. She was only 18 years old, standing on the edge of adulthood, ready to step into a future she would never get to see. Her life was filled with possibility. Dreams of fashion design, a love for protecting the environment, late-night laughter with friends, and the simple joy of adopting a kitten. Those moments, those small pieces of who she was, are what her family holds onto now. Jennifer's parents, her brothers, her friends, every single one of them carries the memory of her smile, her voice, her kindness. They remember the little things. The way she decorated her room with hockey posters, the way she cared so deeply about the world around her, the way she made people feel seen and loved. Those memories cannot be taken, even if her life was. Her father, in his book, said it best. Tragedy will always leave scars, but it does not erase love. Jennifer's family learned to keep living, not because the pain faded, but because love is stronger than grief. They chose to honor her by speaking her name, by sharing her story, and by helping others find hope in the darkest of times. For those of us who didn't know Jennifer personally, her story still leaves an imprint. It reminds us that safety is not something we can take for granted, that the smallest decisions, like walking home at night, can carry risks we never anticipate. But it also reminds us of something deeper, that every person's life matters. Jennifer was not just a victim. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend. She was human. She mattered. Today, her name continues to live on in vigils, in conversations, in the hearts of those who loved her, and even in the minds of strangers who hear her story. And perhaps that is where her legacy lies. Not only in the tragedy of her death, but in the way her story has touched so many, reminding us to look out for one another, to live with compassion, and to never let those we love slip through the cracks of silence. Jennifer Teague's life ended too soon, but her story endures. And as long as her name is spoken, she will never be forgotten.